Should commercial sex be legal? It's a question that's dividing feminists, governments, and sex workers across Europe. An article in The Nation this week looks at two opposing European approaches to prostitution. Legalized prostitution in the Netherlands and Germany has failed to curb the abuses blamed on prohibition. In response, the so-called Swedish model, which bans the purchase but not the sale of sex, is sweeping Europe.
It basically criminalizes Johns, but not prostitutes. And the reason that it's spreading, I think, is that there's a widespread sense, particularly in Europe, that experiments with legalization rather than making life better for people in the sex industry, which was part of what these laws were intended to do. It's made things worse while increasing trafficking and the power of organized crime.
Norway and Iceland adopted the Swedish model in 2009. France and Ireland are considering it. The European Parliament approved a resolution calling on all its member governments to adopt the Swedish-style law. After interviewing sex workers, politicians, police, and activists, Goldberg reports the Swedish model does cut down on prostitution, but at a cost to sex workers by increasing the stigma and driving the work underground.
You know, some of the women in the sex industry are always going to oppose the Swedish model because, it interferes with their business and with their work. But there are ways that you could tweak the Swedish model, for example, to protect women in the sex industry from eviction, to make it clearer in the social services regulations that being in sex work is not a valid reason to take someone's children away.
The debate extends beyond Europe. The Canadian Supreme Court last year struck down its anti-prostitution law and is now considering the Swedish model. In the U.S., curbing demand is growing in popularity, but has meant increasing penalties on Johns without decriminalizing sex workers.
You know, it's interesting, Genevieve, because of sex trafficking and the fact that it's so omnipresent in the United States. A lot of states, I think just fewer than 20, have passed safe harbor laws, which means when they catch underage prostitutes, they don't arrest them. They put them in treatment. They assume that they've been trafficked, and they put them in treatment. But why? So maybe we're moving toward the Swedish model anyway, but why have we not always just penalized the Johns and left the women alone?
Well, I think we should be penalizing the Johns for sure, but I don't think we ought to be encouraging women to sell their bodies for sex. I don't think exploiting women, even if that's a woman's choice to do, is a good thing for them in the long run, or their children. Under this law, I guess they're basically going to say if a woman is wanting to basically sell herself for sex at home, it's okay that her 2-year-old is next door. I think, look, we need to go after
bed, as a story we're about to.
These are dangerous things. So I think we absolutely should not just go after we should go after the Johns for sure, but we should not make this the kind of career that somebody would want to go into.
Well, I certainly agree with that, but I'm going to say this. There's a reason why they call it what it is, the oldest occupation that in the world. And the notion of a woman selling her body and, as you say, making a career is so anathema to me that the first thing I'm trying to think about is what can we do to keep it from happening.
But, you know, in Europe, at least, where they're less uptight about it, I'm not advocating this. I just want to, the other side, there are grown women who do this for a living, who like the fact that they make more money than if they were cleaning houses.
And there ought to be a different, I think Europe, and I think all of us ought to be thinking more about regulation than abolition. And how do you regulate as opposed to assuming I will say for the libertarians, in a world in which a woman has a right to make this choice, that you can simply wipe it off the face of the earth. And I do think there's a difference between trafficking and being a professional prostitute.
But
that's a huge difference.
The reality of these women's lives is that this is not really a choice. This is like the last resort. And I lived in Europe for 4 years, and there was a park that I walked by every night to come home, and I saw these women, and they were the most desperate women. And there in Switzerland, they did not outlaw anything, but they did outlaw pimping. So if someone tried to manage these women, or they were trying to keep out organized crime, there was a situation here in America, in Rhode Island, where a mistake was made in the law so that indoor prostitution was legal. And so from 2004 to 2009, they found some interesting things as they studied those 5 years, that gonorrhea was down by 40%. And the reason was those women who were having sex could say, you have to wear a condom or I can report you to the police, because there was this legal status. So I'm a little ambivalent, because I really view it that these women are victims. But on the other hand, if there's some kind of regulation that can protect their health and to keep out organized crime, maybe there's something there. But I think it's a pretty desperate line of work.
I mean, I'm glad we're making this distinction between prostitutes and, I mean, this idea of sex workers to me is just a misnomer. It's like the Pretty Woman movie where Julia Roberts was a prostitute, but the end goal for her was getting out. The end goal for her best friend was getting out. And I think we can focus on the initial, let's keep them healthy right now. We want everyone to be healthy, but at the same time, we should be looking to the long term of how do we get them out of this lifestyle, and how do we address some of these systemic issues that make this lifestyle or this choice, if you call it a choice, why that's appealing to so many women, so many children, so many young men as well.
Well, is penalizing the guys who buy the sex, that go after the demand, is that the best way to cut it back?
I think
if there's no demand, there's nobody who can, decide.
It's one way,
or get trapped into that.
Yeah, it's one way, but I think we have to be very careful that we would want to legitimize something that says this is an okay thing to do, and that, I mean, to be worried that, gosh, women will feel bad because they're not respected for doing this. They shouldn't be respected for selling their bodies. I don't think that is a message that we want any woman, I don't care how old, how young, to think is an okay thing. And so the Swedish law basically does that. If we follow that model, it's saying we want her to feel okay. Well, it means they don't get arrested. You're not going to be arrested.
It doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden regarded in the same way as the president of Oxford or Cambridge University would be.
Well, and there's a reason they're not. And why is that? Because it's not a good profession, and it's not something that's good for women. And I think it's a very dangerous road for us to get
But when you consider what is happening in this country right now, where generally it is these victimized women who are prosecuted and possibly trafficked in their history, and I do think that it makes more sense than doing what we're doing now.